And we got all different kinds of names there. Oh, okay. Now, there were several causes of World War I, and this could be one of my favorite things about history because I love the main causes of World War I. And we'll talk about these two things in just a question, but I want to go over the main causes of World War I. Militarism. What does militarism mean? Give me a hand. Using what?
Your military to take over smaller.
Good. Using your military to take over small nations, okay? Militarism. Who was doing this?
Big countries.
The Austrians. The Hungarians.
Every answer is not always Hungary, Tom.
I know that it's ours.
I know they had something to do. This is the only time, bless their hearts, this is the only time Hungarians are talked about in history is when they're part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Sad. Who was doing this?
Great Britain.
Great Britain.
America.
Well, not yet, but yeah. Germany. I mean, everybody involved. What's happening is we're starting to develop our militaries as well. Okay, so not only are we actually taking over smaller countries, but we're stockpiling arms. Okay, and we're mobilizing our troops because we're ready to prepare for war. Okay? Second cause, long-term cause. These are the seeds of the war. Long-term cause of World War I, alliances. Okay, what's an alliance? Tom.
That's when they make a team.
When they make a team. Laura.
Like an agreement with another country that they're going to work together and not fight each other.
Good. An agreement, you have your alliances on Survivor or whatever, right? An agreement that you're going to work together and not sneak around behind their back when someone else is fishing and take their, shells. I don't know, whatever happens on Survivor. I forget. But ultimately it's going to come down to alliances. Now the problem with World War I is that our alliances weren't clean. It wasn't like this is one side, this is the other. We had kind of wishy-washy Italy. We had Russia was in, then Russia was out. Okay, so there was a lot of stuff going on. And so really alliances should be entangling alliances because it's a number of different alliances coming together and mixing and crossing over and then separating again. Okay, imperialism, we talked a lot about this earlier this week, taking over smaller countries. All right, and then nationalism. What is nationalism? Patriotism to the extreme. Pride in your country, but to the point that you're like a fanatic, right? Who is the most famous nationalist proponent in history? Hitler, right? So everybody is thinking, how dare you take over my country? My country is the best, right? And it's because of these kind of identity struggles that people start fighting with one another and forming alliances, and they all kind of swirl together. Now, when we look at the main causes of World War I, are you impressed by something? Are you impressed? The main causes of World War I? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Get it? You'll never forget them. Militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism.
Oh, I get it.
Love it. The main causes of World War I. What?
What is the difference between militarism and imperialism?
Good question. Militarism is the process of building up your... the question was, what's the difference between militarism and imperialism? Militarism focuses solely on stockpiling of arms, so weapons and ammunition, and getting your troops ready to go. So we're sitting on this huge army. We're ready to rock. If something happens, we're there. Imperialism is taking over for not only military issues, but what other things could draw people to take over? Social issues, economic issues, political issues. So imperialism is like a wider spread of... militarism can be one part of of imperialism. Does that make sense? What other questions do you have at this point? Okay. And then our spark. So these were kind of like... I used to have this slide. I used to have an overhead that I would show. Yeah, an overhead. I came back from Europe and I was like, "Where's my overhead projector? What am I gonna do?" And they're like, "You're what?" Anyways, so it was like a powder keg with all of these four causes, and then at the very end, like the fuse that went up to the powder keg was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Okay, why was World War I different? It was different due to the way that they fought. They were using trench warfare, which, as you can maybe see in that picture there, what an ineffective way to fight. I mean, once you got your trench dug, it was fine. I mean, fine is relative because you were fighting against rats that were the size of cats and your feet never dried and you had, like, grody things happening and you're like in mud all the time, which I would not enjoy. But they had different weapons. We're starting to see a little bit more of the machine gun there, trench warfare, and we ultimately suffer a lot of death that our country hasn't seen in a long time. So in terms of how World War I is different, these are kind of the three big things there. Trench warfare, you dig your trench and then you make like another mile movement and then you got to dig another trench. It just seems silly. Why did the U.S. enter the war? We held off for a very long time. Wilson held off. He ran on the idea that he kept us out of war because Wilson was kind of this forever optimistic diplomat who wanted to win and settle the war without really declaring a victory for anybody involved. A peace without victory. Really? Who's going to settle for that, right? I mean, it just seems silly. We had neutrality for 3 years, and then ultimately what drove us in was the idea of these attacks that were happening by Unterseeboots. Who's in German? What's an Unterseeboot?
Submarine.
Under the sea boat. Yeah, it's a submarine. So the U-boats were attacking American ships. And we were just kind of going along, like trading with our European partners. And the Germans started to say, you can't trade with anybody in Europe. And Wilson said, yeah, we can. It's okay, we can. And so they sunk some ships. And Wilson responded by saying, Germany, it's not really nice to do that. You should stop attacking our boats. So, of course, Germany says, yeah, okay, fierce Wilson, sure. And so we send more boats, and they get attacked again. And he goes, Germany, this is a stern warning. Stop attacking our boats. Germany. So Germany goes, yeah, okay, whatever. And then they attack more boats, and he says, Germany, I really mean it this time. I'm going to get angry. So he tries to use diplomatic approaches to communicate with the Germans, and it really doesn't work. So ultimately, as a result of these Unterseeboot attacks, we get kind of drawn into the war. And then the Zimmermann telegram. What was the Zimmermann telegram? The German.
Trying to get Mexico to attack.
Yes.
The Germans sent a note to Mexico offering that Mexico should fight the U.S. and in return would get some of the land that they had lost.
Yes. Hey, Mexico. Hey, what? We want to be your partner, says Germany. Why does that scare us? Ha! They're so close to us, and they could kick the crap out of us if they got troops and weapons there. So that makes us nervous. Okay? So we joined the war in 1917. Incidentally, it's the same year that Russia pulls out. What is Russia dealing with that causes them to pull out of the war? Their own revolution, right? So we don't take the place of Russia. We just happen to come in as a result of the U-boat attacks on our ships and fight from there. Yeah. So then we have the end of the war. Wilson comes up with his 14 points. It really kind of crashes and burns. Congress doesn't support it. The only thing that gets talked about at the Treaty of Versailles is the 14th point, which is the League of Nations. And ultimately, the United States votes it down. Our president came up with it. Wilson was seen as a hero in Europe, and we decide that we're not going to, in fact, support it as a country. And so shortly after the war, Wilson goes on a trip to try and drum up support for this League of Nations, which is a precursor to the UN, and ultimately drives him to his deathbed because he spends so much time and energy trying to convince his people that he was right that he dies. This is overview. This is kind of out of order. 1918, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the armistice was signed, the end of the war. So 11/11/1918 is when it ended. We end in late 1917, which we talked about. I don't know why this is in there. This all says the same things we've just talked about. What a dope. We don't need to do this now. I want to talk about Versailles. Where's my slide on Versailles? Okay, so we did have support for the war. We had the Selective Service Act. What's that? The draft, okay? The War Industries Board regulates different things. It was kind of interesting. One of the social things that was happening as a result of this, and we'll see this as we go through the 1920s, women at the time had long dresses. You know, you see these kind of suffragists, and they all walk around in long dresses and all these pictures of people. And during World War I, they decided that they were going to make a fashion statement and move the hem of the dresses up about a foot to, God forbid, expose their ankles. Ah! Right? And the extra fabric that was left would be taken and given to the war effort so they could make uniforms out of it. So they obviously dye it and do whatever. It wasn't like they had purple paisley uniforms. But the other thing that I always found to be really interesting, and I don't remember the exact statistic, but there was a certain level of metal boning in the corsets of dresses, so you could like yank those things in the back, those ties, so you could have like a form-fitting dress. But it was reinforced with metal, and they started to take out those metal pieces, and they were able to make like 8 battleships out of all the metal that they saved from getting rid of the metal from dresses and corsets, which I just think is bizarre. But and then, of course, we move fashion-wise into the kind of scandalous, loose flapper dresses, and things just go crazy because now we can see their knees. And anyways, we have Liberty bonds. People start raising taxes. And there's a lot of propaganda that's used in World War I, too, because we kind of had to get people to support the war because Wilson had been running so long on we're not going to be involved and we don't need to be involved, and all of a sudden we had to switch gears and start financing it. So there's a lot of different things that were going on in terms of support and supplies for the war. And I'll put this on the Edmodo site, too, so if you're writing stuff down and I'm going too fast, you'll live. Okay? Uncle Sam. Where's my Thomas Nast? There you are. Yeah, Uncle Sam. The effects of the other people. There was a lot of confusion that came out of this. Part of the reason that we had such a hard time entering World War I is because we'd be attacking Germany, and Germans are relatives of people who are in the United States. We're still kind of in, the immigrant and first generation and second generation families that are here. So if you're going to attack Germany, you're going to attack my grandfather, or whatever the word is in German for grandfather, and he's over in Germany still. So why would I support that? You're going to go attack my family. So there's a lot of immigrant groups that are attacked for perhaps not supporting the war. And also out of this comes fear of the communists. And this is kind of where it starts to swell, this idea that the communists are behind evil. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, communism as an idea on its own is not evil. It's just that it's been kind of perverted into different manifestations of it through different leaders that have been there through time. And, I mean, obviously you couldn't go from a capitalist country to a socialist or a communist country. It's just, it wouldn't work here. But second thing, we have the Espionage and Sedition Acts to encourage people to promote the war. And if you said anything against the war, you could be jailed. And it really was just kind of a legal way to target people who made other people nervous. So it wasn't probably the finest moment of legislation that was passed, but it was what we did to kind of deal with those that made us nervous at the time. There's a black exodus to the north of African Americans. And at this point, you have to remember that we're still working with segregated troops, right? I mean, there's not any level of equality in terms of society and how people are treated on a social level. Yeah. And then women are starting to finally sink their teeth into society and be seen as somewhat effective. That didn't come out as smoothly as I had it in my head, but you know what I mean.